Gonna finish with the presentation by Jolien de Schepper. Sorry for the pronunciation. Jolien is a PhD student at University of Antwerp in Belgium, and the title of her presentation is Phone in Hand, another very interesting topic. Phone in Hand, a boredom demand, studying the regulation of boredom through smartphone use. So, Jolien, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you for joining this presentation. I'm really honored to be here and to be able to present our work in front of names that I have been referencing to for the past years. So it's really nice for having me. So to really quickly introduce myself, I am Jolien de Schepper from the University of Antwerp in Belgium, and I'm currently in my second year of my PhD, which focuses around finding out how and which media could be beneficial in regulating feelings of boredom. Today, I would like to talk to you about our research that we did together with 14 bachelor students concerning boredom regulation through media use, and I will be presenting this on behalf of Dr. Rudnicki, Prof. Dr. Pols, and Prof. Dr. Van den Bos, and myself, of course. So, voila. As this conference highlights, boredom has been looked at from really different perspectives, and we aimed to look at boredom from a perspective of a communication scientist's perspective. And we do this by incorporating the role of boredom or the role that boredom plays into our media choices. So why would we want to look at media and why now? Well, media has evolved a lot in recent years. I'm 24, but I remember my first phone being this indestructible Nokia and being only able to call, text, and play the game Snake. So we have come a long way from that point in rather little time. So currently we have this little electrical square in our pockets with unlimited possibilities at our fingertips, where relief or distraction is only a click away. So previous research have pointed out to this media being really convenient to regulate our emotions. However, it remains rather unclear how media and media content succeeds in reducing or even resolving feelings of boredom. In other words, is all or are some media more successful at regulating our feelings of boredom? So research, for example, shows that series, viewing, gaming, television, social media, reading, and smartphone, to only name a few here and also reference only a few papers, can be sought out to relieve boredom or are mentioned in a pursuit of relieving those unpleasant feelings. However, some papers also reference to the report of feeling unsatisfied or even getting bored again while using the same media for too long or just not finding the right type of content. So this indicates that there is still room for research into the right media choices during boredom episodes to maybe come up with some strategies that individuals could use instead of gravitating towards a device or a certain content out of habit. So I think you're all really familiar with the concept of boredom, but to give just a little overview, boredom has been described as an unpleasant feeling that we experience in meaningless situations, mostly resulting into the report of negative feelings, but also a short-lived emotion. Due to the meaninglessness and uncomfortable feeling, bored individuals also often experience problems sustaining their attention. And research also typically ascribes low arousal to this emotion due to understimulation. However, around this last part, research does not always seem to agree. Also, high arousal reports and overstimulation were found to be causes of boredom. So some inconsistencies can be found there in the literature. We used in our research the meaning and attentional components model or the MAC model from Westgate and Wilson as a framework. This model was able to incorporate some of the aforementioned inconsistencies around arousal and stimulation by using two main causes for boredom episodes, namely attention component or failure in attention, and also the difference between a meaningful and a non-meaning situation. This results in six boredom profiles, and also four main coping strategies, namely the change in activities, either to an interesting or an enjoyable activity, or cognitive strategies to increase the demand of the situation or increase the resources that we have available. We are interested, or we wanted to look at if those proposed enjoyable or interesting activities could also be translated to media, and could interesting media or enjoyable media could indeed regulate the feelings of boredom. We link these concepts of enjoyable and interesting activities to existing concepts in the media theory about hedonic and eudaimonic content, where hedonic content is the purely entertainment content with really little cognitive demands, and the eudaimonic media is where the interesting part comes from. So on top of the entertainment layer, we also have an additional cognitive requirement to think about life or other reflections. To find out to which extent different levels of boredom are able to predict our choice for either enjoyable or interesting content, we conducted two parallel studies: a diary study to collect data throughout the day, and also an experiment to control the setting. Each of these studies included 18 to 25-year-olds, and to make it feasible, we chose to focus on four different boredom experiences related to understimulation and overstimulation. For the diary study, we also only focused on the low meaning component, since the high meaning was a little bit too complicated to integrate in the diary questions. For the presented media, we will see in a bit, they were also pre-tested, so we had to divide them into the two categories of hedonic and eudaimonic content to be able to start our studies. We came up with a few hypotheses based on the model, but let's continue to the studies. So for the diary study, we asked 40 participants to fill in the diary study each time they experienced boredom. This for a duration of 2 weeks. All 40 participants kept filling in the survey, and this resulted in 485 entries in total. We used Qualtrics to do this with the panel function so that people could keep accessing the link. And while the questionnaire was showed, we measured the boredom level, the situation the participants were in. Also, we asked the SAM scale and media choice. So let's take a look at how that looked. So the first question after they filled in their participant ID was just a one-item question of how bored do you currently feel, to measure the intensity. Then the next question assess their situation by providing a list of possible situations and also the option other in case their situation was not in the list. Also, these other were of course coded afterwards. And for the third part, the SAM scale had to be filled in to measure their level of valence, arousal, and dominance on 3 separate items. Finally, they were given the choice between two options, always a hedonic and eudaimonic options, and the types of media could be movies, series, apps, and games. So the question was, given your current state of boredom, which of the two options would you most likely choose? And an example for movies, for example, was the choice between The Hangover and The Boy in the Striped Pajama. We make sure that we provided enough options so that people were not presented with the same choices after they have opened the survey a few times. For TV series, examples were Friends and the Ted Bundy tapes, which is a documentary on a serial killer. Apps, for example, was the choice between Instagram and LinkedIn. And for games, for example, Candy Crush versus the more challenging Duolingo. So, were we able to predict the choice for enjoyable or interesting media content? Sadly, we weren't. There were no significant results for the different boredom experiences predicting enjoyable or interesting content choices. But we did find evidence for a U-shaped relation between arousal and boredom, meaning that the optimal arousal level did not elicit a lot of intensity of boredom, but lower and higher arousal did elicit more boredom, which can be seen on the graph here. And finally, we also find that there were significant higher boredom levels during the week compared to the weekend. So that's also an interesting finding. As for the experiment, it was a little bit more complicated. So the experiment took place in a lab setting and investigated the bodily reactions of arousal and attention caused by different types of boredom, in turn, the media choices made as a result thereof. During this process, we also checked if there is any change in psychophysiological measurements after making their media choice to check if there is evidence of successful emotion regulation. So for the experiment, we started with a preparation phase. This phase was designed to assess the math skills of the participants. This was done by giving them in advance some math exercises in a coded program, and on the how many they had right, their level was assessed, and then they started on that math level. The next half of the participants were put in either a meaning or non-meaning condition, and afterwards the experiment really started. So they had the boredom manipulation or the math tasks, either understimulation or an optimal level compared to the preparation phase, or an overstimulation. Each participant experienced each boring task 3 times. This resulted in a choice of nine choices after 9 boring tasks. The choices were either to keep doing the math exercises and to lower difficulty, keep the same difficulty, or higher the difficulty. And for media choices, there was a choice between the enjoyable variant or the interesting one. So we had 2 manipulations, the boredom manipulation that were 3 levels of difficulty, and the meaning manipulation where we told people in the meaningful condition that the more exercises they would choose to make, the more money we would donate to the Red Cross, a charity. During the experiment, ECG was measured for attention, EDA was measured for arousal, and also after each math exercise, self-reported boredom, frustration, and meaning were measured. Important to note is that the media choices in the experiment only consisted out of movies and series, so no games or apps were entered in this stage. It looked like this, so the participant was equipped with a device at their hand, non-dominant hand, to measure physiological arousal through the measure of sweat production. This is EDA, or an ECG was measured by a headband with electrodes to measure the brain activity or attention. Then in front of them there was a screen with the math exercises or the videos that they have chosen to play. And for the math exercises, they could enter the numbers on the keyboard. So some general results was that we find significant higher levels of boredom reported with the easier tasks. There was also, the simulating task caused also more arousal and more attentional focus. And when they were in the meaningful condition and in the high stimulation condition, their attentional focus was highest. So there was some kind of interaction effect. Were we able to predict choice for enjoyable or interesting media content in this part of the study? Well, again, there wasn't, but I will explain later probably why that wasn't. But we did find that interesting videos elicit higher levels of arousal, which is also very valuable to know. An important note again is that this study was only 30 participants, so it's statistically underpowered. Due to some constraints into the project of the bachelor students in time and also in manpower. But additional data collection is running now. We're collecting 30 more samples or 30 more participants, so we will be able to complete the findings. So what do these two results mean? Well, meaning increases involvement in a task, we found. Also, there was evidence for both low and high arousal of boredom. And we also find evidence for the U-shaped relation between arousal and boredom, as I showed earlier, which is in line with also previous studies. For the media choices, we did not find evidence for boredom predicting media choices, like I also already mentioned, but we think we know what the cause is, partly because we used existing movies and series. So some of the choices may be motivated by familiarity. For example, if you get to choose between watching an episode of Friends or watching the Ted Bundy tapes, you might just choose Friends because you like Friends and you don't like watching a documentary about serial killers. So that's a possibility there. So it's better that we use in the future either some characteristics of series A and B so that they are presenting the characteristics of enjoyable content and interesting content, or use a similar way of choosing, like Westgate yesterday told us, say the media has been rated so much on the enjoyable scale and so much on the interesting scale, make your choice based on that. So that's a possibility for the future research that we will be doing. And also a second point is that we also need a more nuanced approach for those interesting and enjoyable media, like also was pointed out in those characteristics points. But for example, there is a lot of research that has been finding out which kind of layers are present in hedonic and eudaimonic activities or content. So it's also good to incorporate those into media choices. So follow-up research based on these insights will follow. So we are kind of using this as a little pilot to be able to make better research in the future. And also a quick shout out to the students who helped gathering the data. So thank you for your attention.
Great. Thank you so very much, Jolien. We have now time for questions for Jolien, or for if you have any other for the rest of speakers. So, James?
Yeah, thanks, Jolien, for a really interesting talk. First thing I want to say is please publish those arousal results. Like, are they anywhere near publication? I mean, this is, I think, one of the first demonstrations that you see boredom at both high and low arousal ends. We showed that people report increased levels of restlessness and sleepiness, but it's not the same thing as what you've shown here. And so I think that's really interesting. So please, are you publishing that somewhere?
We are thinking about when we collect the extra samples, so it's more powered.
You're safer will say publish it in the Journal of Boredom Studies, but wherever you do, just publish it somewhere. The second thing I want to ask about is, again, I think you've heard, if you were there yesterday, and we talked a little bit about it earlier today, is that this notion of agency, right? And so when you're asking people, do you want to watch Friends, which apparently your safer feels is like boring, and I think I might agree with her. It's not. It doesn't hold up well, that series, versus Ted Bundy, and Ted Bundy's a risk. I mean, I think that the human fascination, which I share with serial killers, is a really odd one. But so they're unusual choices. I know that you've got some variance in what you used for those particular choices, but they're odd choices. But I think agency is going to be really important. My colleague Mike Dixon talks about what he calls dark flow in problem gamblers, right? So they sit in front of a slot machine and they get in a zone. And it's dark flow in his sense, because getting in the zone for a problem gambler means that you're in trouble, right? But they feel very focused. They feel good until they get off it and realize they've lost a whole bunch of money. I suspect that something similar goes on with the way bored people use their media or their phones, that you passively take in information. You get in a kind of state of, well, my mind is occupied, but it's that passive nature of the occupation that really makes it a negative engagement in the whole, right? And so I wonder whether or not you've thought about, whereas, people who make funny TikToks or YouTube instructional videos or something, they're using their media in an active way, right? So, and I think most of us probably engage with our media actively, but for the people who are highly boredom prone, what makes their interaction with media problematic is that lack of agency, that passive intake of information. And I just wondered what thoughts you had about that.
Yeah, I think agency is indeed really important. We also wanted to incorporate some agency later on in extra experiments, because when you give the choice between two options, you also limit agency, because you can't really choose to what you interact with. So future thoughts about research would be that you just get a scrollable feed and we will just let them interact with whatever they want to interact with, and then look at how many interesting and enjoyable or other type of contents they have interacted with. So I think that's a path that we want to elaborate on, to incorporate a little bit of that agency, but we didn't really think yet of creators of content yet. But that would be maybe interesting to compare.
Yeah, the creation side would be quite hard, but I think that'd be really interesting what you're proposing to do, because you could also look at the depth of their interaction with what you give them. You know, do they surface, scroll through, or do they stop and interact? So yeah, really interesting to see how that goes. Thanks very much.
Thank you.